It's well, not funny, but usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of total precision.
Oh, absolutely. Like engineering.
Right, like you break your arm, the X-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at the screen and says, there it is.
It's binary. I mean, you are broken or you are not broken.
Exactly. And it's comforting. We like things to be visible. But then you step into the world of mental health, and suddenly that X-ray machine is, well, it's completely useless. We are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky.
Oh, it is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. The invisible nature of it makes it so much harder for people to grasp, both for the person experiencing it and the professionals trying to treat it.
Which brings us to today. Welcome to a brand new deep dive. Today we're taking the clinical, university-level science of how the brain breaks down under pressure, and we're crashing it into on-the-ground, practical toolkits for how to actually survive it in the real world.
Yeah, it's a great combination of sources today.
We are pulling from the comprehensive academic teachings of university professor Dr. McConnon H. Birru, specifically his work on mental health foundations. And we're combining that with the highly practical mental health and physical activity toolkit created by the charity Mind.
It really provides this phenomenal wide-angle lens. I mean, the university materials give us the clinical architecture of how the nervous system and the medical system actually function.
Right.
While the community toolkits, like from mine, provide the actionable strategies for, living with these realities day to day.
So if you're listening to this, whether you are a student entering the healthcare field, a professional looking to better support your team at work, or just, insanely curious about how your own brain handles the modern world, this deep dive is going to give you a structured, empathetic framework for understanding mental health.
Definitely.
We're going to cover everything from the hidden biological mechanisms of stress to the intense human dynamics of therapy and the strict ethical rulebook that protects patients during their most vulnerable moments.
But to really understand any of that, we kind of have to start by completely tearing down the way society defaults to defining health in the first place.
Oh yeah, the baseline definition.
Right. Because if you ask the average person on the street, they view health merely as the absence of sickness.
Like, if I'm not sick, I'm healthy.
Exactly. If you aren't coughing, if you aren't actively in a hospital bed, congratulations, you are healthy.
That is definitely the cultural baseline, for sure.
But the clinical world, drawing from the World Health Organization, uses a much more demanding definition.
Okay, what is it?
Health is defined as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being.
Complete well-being.
Complete, not just the absence of disease. It's about thriving, not just surviving.
Wow.
And when we apply that to mental health, specifically in Dr. Birru's work, it demands that we look at human flourishing. Are you realizing your own abilities? Are you coping with normal stresses? Are you working productively and contributing to your community?
That is a massive shift in the goalposts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it means you can be out of bed, going to work, paying your bills, and still not be considered completely healthy in a clinical sense.
Precisely. Which brings us to one of the most vital concepts in Dr. Birru's teachings, the mental illness continuum.
A continuum.
Right. Instead of a rigid healthy or sick binary, mental health is a fluid scale. He breaks it down into 5 zones.
Okay, what are the zones?
You've got excelling, thriving, surviving, struggling, and finally in crisis. And the reality is that every single one of us moves up and down this scale throughout our lives.
So you don't just achieve the excelling zone and stay there forever.
Oh, definitely not. Nobody lives at the peak indefinitely.
Okay, let's unpack this continuum concept a bit more. Is this basically like a car's gas gauge?
How do you mean?
Well, we don't just magically go from a full tank to suddenly broken down on the side of the highway with like smoke billowing out of the hood.
Right.
There are warning lights like the surviving or struggling zones on this continuum where you start to notice the engine sputtering. Like maybe it's poor sleep, trouble focusing, or just that lingering sense of dread on a Sunday night.
That's a perfect analogy, and that warning light is crucial because most people just ignore it.
Yeah, we really do.
They think poor sleep or irritability is just a side effect of a busy week, right? Not stage 1 of a biological breakdown. Recognizing those middle zones when you're just treading water or noticing subtle changes in your appetite or concentration, that is the absolute key to early intervention.
But we don't do that.
No, we have been conditioned to wait for the total breakdown, the crisis zone, before we seek help. But like you said, if you can read your own dashboard, you can act before the engine completely seizes up.
And, if you are listening to this right now and thinking, well, I mostly stay in the thriving zone, the statistics tell a much broader story.
They really do. The numbers are staggering.
Yeah, Dr. Birru points out that in a single recent year, nearly 52 million adults in the U.S. experienced a diagnosable mental illness. And the Mind Toolkit notes that 1 in 4 adults will experience a mental health problem in any given year.
1 in 4. Let that sink in. And at the absolute darkest end of that continuum, the crisis zone, 125 Americans die by suicide every single day.
God, that's heavy.
It is. And over 90% of those individuals had an underlying mental illness. So this isn't just an academic theory. It is a serious public health imperative.
So if we know we slide up and down this continuum, the obvious question is, what actually pushes us down into that struggling or crisis zone?
Well, the underlying causes are incredibly complex. It's this intricate, tangled web of genetics, environment, childhood trauma, and neurotransmitter imbalances.
Neurotransmitters, we have chemicals in the brain, right? Like serotonin, dopamine, and GABA.
Exactly. Those are the big ones.
Wait, before we go further, you hear those terms thrown around all the time in commercials or pop psychology, but what are they actually doing? What is a neurotransmitter physically doing in my head?
Okay, think of neurotransmitters as the chemical messengers that allow your brain cells to talk to each other.
Okay.
Dopamine is heavily involved in your brain's reward center and motivation. Serotonin is a master regulator. It impacts your mood, your sleep, even your digestion.
Really? Digestion?
Oh, yeah. A huge amount of serotonin is actually in your gut.
I had no idea.
And then there's GABA, which is gamma-aminobutyric acid, that acts essentially as the brain's brake pedal. It inhibits neural activity, calming your nervous system down.
So it stops things from spiraling.
Exactly. So when those chemicals are depleted or not binding properly, the communication network in your brain starts dropping calls.
Okay, so if that's the chemical foundation, what throws that network out of whack in the first place?
The primary catalyst that frequently pushes us down the continuum is stress. Stress. It literally physically alters our brains. And clinically, we look at stress responses in 2 distinct ways.
Okay.
First, there's the acute response. This is your immediate sympathetic nervous system kicking in. The classic fight or flight panic button that Walter Cannon talked about.
But like the sudden adrenaline dump when a car swerves into your lane on the highway. Heart rate spikes, pupils dilate, blood pressure shoots up.
Yes. That response is designed to save your life in a split second.
Right.
But there's a second framework developed by Hans Selye called the General Adaptation Syndrome, or GAS. And this explains what happens when the stress doesn't go away.
What happens when the car keeps swerving into your lane for months on end?
Exactly. The syndrome is broken down into 3 stages. The first is alarm that initial panic button.
But if the threat doesn't leave, say it's a toxic boss you have to see every single day, or crushing financial debt, what happens next?
Your body enters the second stage, which is resistance. This is where your body tries to biologically adapt to a constant state of high alert.
So it's fighting back.
Trying to, your hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and adrenal glands, what we call the HPA axis, they are constantly pumping out stress hormones like cortisol to keep you functioning under fire.
Okay, but this theory sounds very neat on paper. In reality, how do I know if I'm in the resistance phase or if I'm just having a normal, stressful month at work? Where is the biological line?
The line often reveals itself in your immune system. It's really fascinating. Acute short-term stress actually acts as a temporary shield. It increases pro-inflammatory cytokines in your blood.
Wait, let me stop you there. What actually is a cytokine? Are we talking about a hormone, a white blood cell? Like, what is physically floating in my blood right now?
Okay. Cytokines are small proteins released by your immune cells. They act as the alarm sirens of your immune system.
Okay.
If you get a cut, cytokines rush to the area and signal your body to create inflammation to heal the wound and kill off any bacteria.
So they're the first responders.
Right. Under acute stress, your body pumps out these cytokines as a preemptive defense. It's preparing for battle.
Oh, wow. So a little inflammation in the short term is a feature, not a bug.
Yes. But, and this is the crucial part, if you are stuck in that resistance phase for months or years, your body is constantly flooded with these alarm sirens.
Oh, no.
That causes systemic, chronic inflammation throughout your entire body. It drastically increases your risk of cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disorders, and severe depression.
Because it never turns off.
Right. Eventually, you hit the third stage of the stress syndrome, exhaustion. Your physiological and psychological resources are completely bankrupt. The HPA axis gets stuck in overdrive, and your own chemical defenses basically turn against you.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. This completely flips how we should think about a stress-free life.
Oh, so.
Well, the goal isn't to live in a vacuum with zero stress.
Right.
Right? Because short-term stress, like a challenging project or learning a new skill, actually exercises that system and builds resilience.
Exactly.
The goal is simply to prevent ourselves from ever hitting that exhaustion phase where the biology turns toxic.
You nailed it. You literally cannot separate the mind from the body. The physical inflammation is driving the mental breakdown, and the mental breakdown is driving the physical inflammation.
It's a terrifying loop.
Yeah.
So let's say someone's HPA axis is completely fried. They've burned through their resistance, they've hit exhaustion, and they've slid all the way down the continuum into a full mental health crisis.
Yeah.
How do professionals actually pull them back?
There are two main medical avenues detailed in Dr. Birru's teachings: psychopharmacology and psychotherapy.
Okay, meds and talking.
Right. Psychopharmacology involves medications that target those specific neurotransmitters we decoded earlier. We're talking about antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, and SSRIs for depression.
So how does an SSRI actually fix the broken communication network in the brain?
Well, SSRI stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor.
Right.
Normally, your brain releases serotonin into the tiny gap between neurons to send a message, and then it quickly reabsorbs it, sort of like a sponge soaking up water.
Okay, that makes sense.
An SSRI blocks that sponge. It stops the reabsorption, leaving more serotonin floating in that gap for a longer period of time, which amplifies the signal and helps stabilize the mood.
Oh, I see. So what does this all mean? If psychotropic medications are like putting training wheels on a wobbly bike to immediately keep it from tipping over?
Then talking therapies must be where you actually learn how to pedal, balance, and steer so you can eventually ride on your own. Yes.
I love that.
It's a great way to put it. The medication provides the immediate biological stability required to do the intense cognitive work.
Right.
And that cognitive work psychotherapy is structured as a deeply intentional human relationship. Hildegard Peplau outlined a classic 4-phase therapeutic roadmap for this.
4 phases. Okay, what are they?
It starts with a pre-interaction phase, where the professional preps and reviews the patient's history. Then an orientation phase, where strict boundaries and goals are set to build trust.
Laying the ground rules.
Right. Then comes the third phase, which is the working phase, and this is the heavy lifting.
This is where the actual therapy happens.
Exactly. This is the intense exploration of trauma, developing coping skills, and challenging deep-seated beliefs. It requires immense vulnerability from the patient.
I can imagine. It sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting work,
Yeah.
and the psychological complexity in that room during the working phase is staggering because of two phenomena: transference and countertransference.
I've heard those terms. What's the difference?
Transference is when the patient unconsciously redirects feelings or expectations from someone in their past, like a hypercritical parent, directly onto the therapist.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they start reacting to the therapist as if the therapist is that parent.
That has to be incredibly difficult to navigate without taking it personally.
Which is exactly why the therapist has to manage countertransference. That is the therapist's own emotional reaction to the client. It's the therapist's own unresolved baggage influencing how they perceive the patient.
Oh, I see. To build on the bike analogy, a therapist must actively manage their countertransference to ensure they aren't accidentally grabbing the handlebars and projecting their own fears of falling onto the patient.
That is exactly it. You have to stay objective. And eventually, that leads to the final phase: termination.
Termination. That sounds so harsh.
I know, it sounds awful, but it's actually the entire goal of the process. It's the bittersweet end of the formal relationship because the patient has gained the independence to manage their mental health on their own.
That's the ultimate win.
It is. And we should also note that clinical therapy isn't happening in a vacuum. The Mind Toolkit brings in complementary environmental treatments.
Oh, right. Like what?
They focus heavily on daily self-care routines. They call them the 5 ways to well-being. And things like ecotherapy.
Ecotherapy. Healing through nature.
Literally healing the nervous system through structured time spent in green spaces or doing outdoor conservation work.
That connects really well with something Dr. Birru touches on conceptually, right? Milieu therapy.
Yes, milieu therapy.
The idea that the physical environment itself, like the natural light in a room, the arrangement of comfortable furniture, the predictability of structured routines, is an active participant in the patient's recovery.
Absolutely. You aren't just treating the brain, you are treating the space the brain exists in.
But, giving someone the tools to rebuild their mind in therapy requires them to be completely exposed and vulnerable.
Very much so.
The power dynamic between a patient in crisis and a medical professional is inherently uneven.
It's massively uneven.
Right. So how do we stop bad actors from taking advantage of that vulnerability?
That brings us to the final major area of clinical foundations, the ethical and legal rulebook. Because that vulnerability is so high, there has to be an ironclad set of rules.
Okay.
Dr. Birru outlines core ethical principles that govern every single interaction. You've got justice, which is fair care for all, non-maleficence, the duty to do no harm, beneficence, the duty to actively do good, and autonomy, the patient's fundamental right to self-determination.
Plus fidelity and veracity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being faithful to promises and telling the truth.
Yes, exactly.
But let's look at how these principles actually operate in the real world, because this raises a huge question. They have to crash into each other constantly.
Oh, all the time.
How does a nurse or doctor balance these principles when they are in direct conflict? For example, how do you balance autonomy, a patient's right to refuse treatment, with beneficence, the duty to do good and save a life, if a patient is involuntarily committed to a facility against their will?
That is the ultimate moral tension in psychiatric care. It's fascinating.
Walk me through it.
Imagine a nurse holding a tray of antipsychotic medication. They know, medically, this pill will help stabilize a patient who is experiencing terrifying hallucinations. That is beneficence.
Right. You want to help them.
But the patient, who is brought in by a court order, refuses to take it. What's fascinating is how the legal framework approaches this friction. You might assume that if someone is involuntarily committed, they lose all their rights.
Yeah, you'd think the court order just overrides everything.
But even when involuntarily committed, a patient generally retains the right to refuse non-emergency medication.
Wait, really? So even if a judge says you have to stay in the hospital cannot force you to take a pill?
Not unless you are in a literal life or death emergency situation where you are in imminent danger to yourself or others.
Wow.
Exactly. To force medication in a non-emergency, the hospital often has to go back through a separate, rigorous legal or administrative review process. It highlights how the system, despite its flaws, bends over backward to preserve human dignity and bodily autonomy.
That's incredible. And one of the most empowering legal tools Dr. Birru discusses to proactively protect that autonomy is a Psychiatric Advance Directive, or a PAD.
PADs are an incredible legal mechanism.
How do they work?
They allow a person with a mental illness to state their preferences for treatment in advance of a crisis. So you can legally document which medications work for you, which ones give you terrible side effects, which facilities you prefer, or who is authorized to make decisions for you.
It's essentially a living will for your mental health.
Yes.
You make the decisions while you are in the thriving or surviving zone on that continuum, so that if you slide into the crisis zone and temporarily lose your decision-making capacity, your voice is still legally binding in that room.
It gives a voice to your future self when your future self cannot speak. It's a beautiful concept.
It really is. But we also have to acknowledge the absolute extremes of care. There are moments when the system has to resort to involuntary seclusion or physical restraints.
We do. And the rules governing those extremes, as Dr. Birru emphasizes, are incredibly rigid.
As they should be.
Absolutely. A nurse cannot use restraints as a standing order or just because a unit is understaffed. They are absolute last resorts.
Right.
They're used only when a patient is in imminent physical danger, and they require a doctor's order, usually within an hour or two of the emergency.
And the monitoring is intense, too.
Very.
Patients in restraints or seclusion must be checked continuously, or at minimum, like every 15 minutes.
Yes, the constant monitoring is non-negotiable.
And importantly, once the crisis is passed, there's a mandatory debriefing for both the staff and the patient. They have to sit down and process the trauma of what just happened.
Because it is traumatic. It's all about ensuring immediate physical safety while fiercely guarding whatever dignity can be maintained in a dire situation.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today on this deep dive. I mean, we started by redefining health itself, mapping out the fluid continuum where we all slide between excelling and struggling.
We unpack the visceral biology of stress, seeing how a stuck HPA axis and chronic inflammation can push us into physical and mental exhaustion.
Right. We explored the messy, intensely human connection required in therapeutic healing, navigating the training wheels of medication, and the heavy lifting of psychotherapy.
And we ended by looking at the ethical friction, the legal guardrails that protect human autonomy in our darkest moments.
The value of this framework from Dr. Birru's university teachings and the Mind Toolkit is just immense. Whether you're using this to recognize the warning lights on your own mental dashboard, to better support a family member, or to just understand the mechanics of the healthcare system.
It really changes mental health from this binary flaw into a deeply complex, universal human experience.
It really does change how you look at the world around you. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to chew on today. We talked earlier about milieu therapy, the clinically proven idea that our physical environment, our access to natural light, our daily routines, and the social vibe of a space profoundly dictates our mental recovery in a clinical setting.
Right.
If that is undeniably true for patients in crisis, how might we radically redesign our everyday spaces to act as preventative milieu therapy environments?
Oh, that's a brilliant question.
What if we completely reimagined the harsh lighting of our corporate offices, the rigid structures of our elementary schools, or even the layouts of our own homes? What if we built the physical world around us to keep our nervous systems in the thriving zone long before we ever need professional care?
It's a huge shift in perspective.
It's definitely something to think about the next time you walk into a room. Until next time, keep diving deep.